I'm Patty Davis. I'm a publisher with Emerald Group Publishing. And here with me today is Megan Larkin with Springer Publishing, Malavika Legg with Portland Press, and Cy Konda with the Society of
American Chemical Society.
American Chemical Society. And the four of us organized this workshop based on last year's workshop that we had. Anybody here did last year's workshop at all? Yeah, them, yeah. All right, good. Well, today's workshop is going to be mostly discussion. We have pulled together topics that are fairly common for people managing journals, and we're going to break out and talk about the ways that those most often problems are handled in the various ways and outcomes of those, so that we can share our experiences and the good, the bad, the ugly. So to start off with the good, the bad, the ugly, we have invited an editor who is an award-winning professor, full professor at DePaul University here in Chicago. He's going to speak to a few minutes about his experiences. He has both sides of the publishing experience, both as an author, a book author, and he is the editor-in-chief of Management Decision, which is one of Emerald's premier journals. And he is a full professor, soon to be moving to the University of Alabama to head up their entrepreneurship center. So here is Patrick Murphy.
Welcome to our city. Those of you who are not from here, hope you have a great time, although it's going to rain later today, and I apologize for that, but I hope you get a chance to walk up and down Michigan Avenue and enjoy our beautiful restaurants and shops and so forth. I didn't prepare a lot of formal remarks. I just jotted down some rough observations of my experience that as I was reflecting on it yesterday and today to do this for Patty, and thank you, Patty, for inviting me to come and talk to everybody. I, as Patty mentioned, have experience as an author of a book where I had a very intense, long, interactive experience with the publisher at Yale University Press. And somebody here is from New Haven. I saw a tag. Yeah, that's right. So I learned a little bit from that, and I can talk about that. And then, of course, as in my capacity as a journal editor, I have a range of experiences there, very rich sort of store of experiences that I've incurred, some very bizarre, some very inspiring and positive, and I'll share all of that, and then I'll talk through some of my views on what, as a journal editor, what I really need from a publisher to help me do the best work that I possibly can. And I understand that you're all on the publishing side of this whole equation, so I'll try to tailor my remarks so that they'll be most useful to all of you. And then, of course, as an author, just in general, what I think would be really helpful, because a lot of the authors are professors at universities and they're building careers, and there's a lot that I think a publisher can do that probably wouldn't even make much difference to you, but could make a lot of difference to them. So I'll talk about what some of those things are. Okay, so as an academic, I think we're in a very unique position. We kind of have to establish ourselves as individuals in a way that other people can't ignore us. And it's my favorite part of academia. There's a lot of odd birds, or as the Chinese say, there are many birds in the forest. And you'll see all sorts of really interesting characters. And I think when you see a professor who's doing something that nobody else is doing, that may be somebody that you want to keep your eye on, because they are usually the ones, if they do it well, that make a contribution that they become known for. And these are the people who get promoted, they earn tenure, and they generate a lot of attention for their work. There's another kind of academic, not to generalize, but another career strategy is to kind of do we published model. We've always called it Me Too scholarship, but that's not the best moniker now, given you know, the news and so forth. But, so the meaning of it, what I mean by that is, oh, this person's using that model, this published model, to do this sort of work and this sort of sample, so I will do the same thing in order to get into the same journal that that person has published in. And there's room for that. There's a place for these sorts of career builders, but in my opinion, from your point of view, they're not always the kind of people who are going to come in and make unique impact that can take, say, a journal from here to here, because you really want those unique contributions. And I think the former category, and you can find them if you look at universities and look at, say, different departments in colleges, you can identify the people that are doing really unique things. These individuals are usually doing it for some sort of personal purpose that's also very motivated, and it drives a lot of what they do. And so I should think that from your perspective, these are the academics that you might want to build relationships with if you're really trying to build a journal or a portfolio. For me, in particular, I have a very irrational love for history, but I'm a business school professor. As Patty mentioned, I'm one of the entrepreneurship faculty at DePaul University, just down the street here. If you walk down State far enough and you reach Jackson, our business school is right there on the corner of State and Jackson in an old department store building. Actually, now I'm already getting excited by the history. If you do walk up and down State Street, you'll see a lot of old department stores, like they turned the old Carson Peary Scott into a Target. There's Marshall Field's, of course, which was acquired by Macy's. Goldblatt's is what my business school is in. It used to be Goldblatt's, but you can see vestiges and reminders of the old world and the old history of what it was 100 years ago, and it's very, very interesting. I love history, and when I first started out in my career, I was working with a lot of entrepreneurial ventures. We have an incredible entrepreneurial ecosystem here in our city, like those incubators that you've heard of, like innovation hubs and so forth. We have 36 of those in Chicago, and I'm about to move to Birmingham, where they have 2, and one of them is pretty big. And it's just very interesting the kind of advantages we have here. But in working with so many entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial ventures, I noticed that there's a lot of mutinies that occur. In fact, a lot of people don't know that Silicon Valley started with a mutiny in Shockley Semiconductor in the late 1950s, and it's sort of this logic of, as something grows, the people who founded it aren't always the best people to lead it, and there's like a coordinated overthrow mechanism. It's part of adaptivity. It's like trees shedding their leaves or something. Found it very interesting, and so that became my thing, and I became very interested in mutinies. But when you try to research something like that, they don't want to talk to you about it for a lot of reasons, which make a lot of sense. But it still is a thing that happened. And so it took me down this long road where I was looking for data and about mutinies. But the only thing I could get were shipboard logbooks and journals going back hundreds of years. All of these amazing archival data are digitized, translated, available in museums and institutes and libraries around the world. And so this became my thing, where I was looking at journals and logbooks from ventures in the age of discovery in the 1500s and 1600s. And my colleagues are asking me, what the hell are you doing? You're a business school professor. Why are you reading logbooks from seafaring ventures? And my answer was, because it's interesting to me. And I didn't know where it was leading. I just knew that there was something there, and I wanted to draw from those old ventures, which I viewed as very similar to the entrepreneurial ventures of today. In fact, more similar to them than the large companies of today. And so we can learn a lot from them, and it proved to be the case. In fact, I got a career-making book out of it, and but that was just a result of me following my passion. So my dealings with the publisher at that point were phenomenal, because I found a very open-minded group, a team, who was more excited about my passion for the subject than really thinking about the market. So I know that they need to sell books, and this is very important to them, but they seemed to key in on the fact that I was interested about this, and I had an extraordinary amount of time and rigor and investment into the work, and that was very important to them. And So look for that. In other words, don't look for what's popular in the book market or the journals. Don't look for the well-known model or the well-known author. I think there's a magic kind of spark where the one who's doing something nobody else is doing and doing it in a very intense way could be your Mickey Mouse or, you know, Disney. Bad metaphor, sorry. But the thing that really makes a phenomenal contribution. So that's what I remember about working with Yale, and it meant a lot to me. Although I wanted to give the book a different title, and they disagreed, and I learned a little bit about publishing in terms of, well, they got to name the book, and I didn't, even though I wrote it, you know, and that was an education, but it's fine. They know what they're doing. Yeah, I'll stop there. So about the journal, I was contacted by one of Patty's predecessors. We've gone through 3, I think, different publishers now. Emerald has a way of internally reshuffling the deck chair, bad metaphor again, sorry. Not reshuffling the deck chairs, reconfiguring the resources and reassembling them. And, sorry, that was a little dig there, a little joke.
Yeah, that's okay.
And so I'm on to Patty now, but I remember the lady from the UK flew over and she wanted to meet me, and she was coming to Chicago, right? So she landed in Chicago, and then she jumped on the Blue Line from the airport and got off at the Chicago Blue Line stop because she's going to Chicago. But that took her way over on the west side, where she was quite far from the downtown area where I'm located. And then she walked all the way from there, pulling her suitcase, which is about a 3.5 mile, 3 mile walk. And it's not, I don't know, if you're not a local and if you don't know the city, I wouldn't recommend it. But she did it, and she showed up, and then we had a really nice conversation in the cafe about the journal, and we talked about impact and my view of impact, which I'll get to in a minute. And then Emerald has been wonderful to work with. I come up with a lot of ideas for the journal and how I wanted to restructure things. Now, at the time, and this gets into a little bit of the ugly, I guess, my predecessor was a gentleman who was in a citation sharing scheme with another journal. Stacking, yes, to use the proper nomenclature. And they removed him, and so I moved in. And I remember one of the early questions was, well, does this concern you? Do you think it'll have a reputation? And are you concerned that it'll make you look bad? And I said, absolutely not. I mean, just give me the freedom to do stuff here, and I don't think it'll matter at all. And it hasn't, and it's actually a really nice turnaround story. Our submissions have just climbed and climbed and climbed. And one of the first things I did was I wanted to make a huge editorial board. So we're pushing like 200 people, I think, on our editorial board. And I think when I joined, we had 80. And I had been a division chair in the Academy of Management. And so, in my view, there's no cost to the journal associated with having a large group of people on the editorial board, other than just having names on the website and maybe people registered in Scholar One. There's no real carrying cost there, but it builds capacity amazingly, and it's very, very good for the professors to get onto the board, especially tenure-track professors who are building their career, because they can show service to the profession by being on the board. And so I'm still building the board. I send names to Rebecca. Just the reality is, the other day I sent names to her. I'm still always building the board. In my view, there's no real limit, no real practical limit. And if an editor wants to do that, I say do it, because the reality is reviewing takes a lot of time for professors, and it's a pretty thankless, nameless job. And there's a new tool called Publans, which I think you're hopefully all familiar with. I didn't know what quite to think of Publans at first, but this is a online registration system, and they coordinate with our publishing team and with the reviewers, so that reviewers can get credit for their reviews that, in theory, they could use if they're going up for promotion or tenure, which is a pretty cool innovation. And I didn't quite believe in it at first, but I'm starting to see the value in that, and I like it a lot. And so again, that's what I wanted to do, and they agreed with me, building the board to make it very big. And I remember there were a couple of questions at first. They were a little bit more, well, who are you letting on, and how are we going to vet them? And there was a little bit of that from the publisher, and I was like, who cares? Just put them on there, and if they prove to be, whatever, we'll get rid of them. Let's just build up the board. There's a lot of error and messiness in there anyway, and rather than judge them by looking at their CV, just get them on the board and see if they do a good review. I mean, the author's not going to see their name anyway. That tends to be my approach here, and that's been great. We have a large team of associate editors. I think we have 11, and we are a general management journal. So management is a broad discipline. It was born of sociology, really, and then psychology kind of got in there. Those are the two older disciplines, and then a little bit of economics, but not too much. They're sort of outside the business school. But we are, I believe, and I'm looking for authoritative information about this. I think we're the oldest management journal. 63 is when we were founded. Journal of Management Studies was founded in 1964. And I'd love to get verifiable information. So we use language like we are thought to be the oldest, or we're one of the oldest, but it's a pretty cool thing to be able to say. But we have a large team of AEs, and they cover all the different areas. And our submissions, I think the first year I moved in as editor, I was co-editor the first few years with a gentleman, a scholar in the UK, my co-editor. And then we went into a big restructuring, and we've kind of shifted things around, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I think the first year I moved in, we had 635 submissions, and we're right around 1,500 per year. This is like 3 or 4 years later. So things have grown quickly in the near past, and we've really tried to restructure in order to enable or promote that, but also keep up with that. And I'll talk about some of the restructuring decisions we've made in just a little bit. So critical experiences, impact, I'll get to that in just a minute. Let me talk about the restructuring, in fact, right now. So as the editorial board grew, and I was recruiting people and warming up my network and encouraging other people to do the same, our submissions grew, and then we found we needed more associate editors who are kind of like the middle management layer over the editorial board. As I say, we have 10 or 11 right now, but I found that we needed even an additional layer of coordination, so we have senior associate editors now who, and the way our model works may be a little bit unique. I have 2 editorial assistants, one former student of mine and one current student, and they receive all submissions to the journal, and we get a pretty healthy number of them, as I mentioned. What the editorial assistants do is I ask them to reject as many as they can based on format. So we have journal formatting criteria, and they can throw it back to the author if it's too long or if it's not set up in the right way, because I believe that a properly formatted and structured article, and the author is the one who needs to do the work to do this, will be better received by the board, easier to review by the board, and if they see a standard format coming in, forget about content, just format, that's better for our operation. And so the 2 editorial assistants split those up. And then for the 40% or so that make it through their doorway, they assign those papers to one of the 2 senior AEs based on submission number. One of them gets the odd numbers, one of them gets the even numbers. And then those 2 individuals look at the paper for content, fit, conceptual aspects. We want them to make a determination of whether or not that article fits with the journal and whether the rigor is there. They don't have to read the paper in detail. We're trying to winnow down our submissions and only let the highest quality ones through to get to the proper review cycle with the editorial board. But that's what those 2 individuals do. And this restructuring is not the way we used to do it. We basically used to have it go straight to an editor and an AE right away, and then right to the reviewers. And as our submissions grew, we had to build capacity with our structure. And so this is how we've set it up to sort of winnow things down where we can focus on quality. Originally, I wanted to reduce the number of papers that we publish, because my strategy was I want to raise the impact of this journal. There's a trade-off between quantity and quality in organizational life, and I wanted to raise quality, and one way to do that is to lower quantity so we can raise the bar, so we can publish only the very best papers. But my publisher, Emerald, needs to keep the quantity at a particular level. And I didn't understand why they wanted to keep publishing the same number of papers. Eventually I figured it out though. In Europe, the way a lot of the papers are accessed by professors like myself is on a paper-by-paper basis, and there's a pay-per-download model. Very common over there. Over here, the standard is that libraries buy subscriptions to journals, and then whoever's working at that university gets free and open access. But there's like a business-to-business subscription model, versus over there is a pay-per-article, so it's a revenue stream. And the more articles we put out there in the journal, the more likely it is that a professor is going to find one and click to download and pay. Follow me? I think that explained what was going on. And that's fine. That's the reality of doing business for our publisher. And so I had the challenge of keeping quantity the same while raising quality. That's a challenge. And so the way we did that was my erstwhile co-editor, whom I mentioned, just Andy Adcroft, the University of Surrey, became the editor of special issues. So 50% of our content approximately is in special issues now. We get a lot of requests for special issues, and they're a nice thing to do with. There's a really nice, cool idea for a special issue. It can generate a lot of attention. And so that's going to pretty much assure like a good solid number of submissions, and then those are now special issue submissions, and then all the regular issue submissions, we didn't touch that. So I'm assuming that's going to be the same, but now we've essentially cut in half the number of those regular submissions that we need to accept. And so by raising the bar, by lowering the quantity, the number of those papers, I can hopefully raise quality. So I'm hoping to see our impact go up through this, and it seems to be working well so far. We're catching up, and the senior AEs have some long queues they need to work through, but it seems to be working forward. Emerald's been great. So I'm a management scholar, so I love to look at an operation and think about what it wants to achieve and how to restructure it in order to achieve its goals. And this is something that I cooked up, and they were great. They were great to work with, and I appreciate that. So I'll just close out here with a few observations. We've had a few oddballs, like not scary stuff, but you know, there's a lot of birds in the forest, as I said, and so we'll get like the odd email like about some weird thing going on in the journal, or we've gotten an email about 8 times from a scholar in another country offering to pay us a lot of money to publish his I don't know what he wants to publish. Maybe everyone in his department is going to get a publication. And you know, it happens. So I find, I'm thinking of the professors now, not all professors are equally capable of dealing with all the different people out there. It freaks some of them out. For me, I'm pretty unflappable, so I can handle whatever is coming my way. But when you choose editors and so forth, understand that they're going to get weird messages from people. So the person begging us to publish and offering us a lot of money, it's like a couple $1,000s I think they want to pay us to publish their paper. But the other one, there's a gentleman in yet another country, I've gotten about 20 or 25 emails from him, and he keeps calling me, no, he keeps telling me that he's my child. And I'm like your child, please do this for you. And I don't know what he's getting at. And then there's like 40 please, 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 over and over and over again. And then he actually, and then Andy told me that this individual called him on the phone one time. And it just, you know, I don't know, they're out there. So you need to be able to deal with that. It's just the reality. Professors, and, you know, if you open things up, and I don't know, take that for what it's worth, but don't just take someone because they have a nice record and put them in there. Explain to them when you select people for this job that they're going to have a lot of different unique situations to deal with. And I suppose that relates to personal style. So just like Emerald sent, gosh, I can't even remember her name now. Do you remember who that original one was?
Juliet Harrison.
Juliet Harrison, that's right, who got off at the Chicago Blue Line stop. we sat down and talked a lot about personal style and what I believed in. And I think that's very important, even though you may have a large publishing operation. And there is a trend toward corporatization and structuration in academia and also in the journals. I'll get to that and what it means for impact in just a minute. You can't lose the human element. A lot of these things are highly personal, especially to the authors who submit to your journal. They need it for tenure. Like, we get a lot of notes saying, look, I have to get an answer now because I'm going on the market or I'm going up for promotion and tenure. And you have to make a choice about how to deal with that. And they can be pretty desperate sometimes. So get to know your editors and the people who are leading your journals. About impact, so a lot of universities now are constructing and building what we could generally call a journal list. You may have heard of that. For those of you who haven't, I'll explain what that is. Journals need to make decisions about promotion and tenure of their professors, and one of the ways they do that is they evaluate the scholarship of the academics working in the college or in the university. And rather than look at the individual papers that the scholars publish, there's this trend, and it's to generate efficiency and build capacity, I guess. It's sort of a way to structure things rather than do the work yourself. You look at the outlets in which the scholars publish their papers. And if you publish in this outlet, therefore, that's a great piece of scholarship, okay? That's the logic. There's different views out there. I personally reject this logic, and there's some great editorials and so forth. Like the editor of Science, I think it was, wrote a really nice piece about this a few years ago, and we were sending it around in my business school because we were having this war over whether to have a journalist or not. I reject it for the same reasons he did, and that's because it's essentially profiling. I mean, we don't do that to people. Why would we do that to articles? Oh, in other words, you are the member of this category or this group, therefore you must be this. No, it's not true. There's a lot of articles in middle tier or lower tier journals that actually get more citations than some articles in top tier journals. That is higher impact at the individual level of that particular scholar making a publication. And so that's the argument against a journalist, but then there's arguments for it. So a lot of your editors, a lot of your authors and so forth will be in this realm and have one opinion or another. So the impact factor, I know you're all, I'm guessing you're all familiar with what that is and how it's calculated, right? I think it's like a moving window, and then it's all the papers in your journal, and it's citations per paper. It's an average. I have a paper in the Journal of Management History, for example. It's probably the best paper I've ever written. It has more citations than the average Academy of Management Journal article, which is one of our top tier journals. And I've hit those top tier journals as well. And this one paper, which I'm most proud of, which led to my book with Yale, didn't count for much at all when I went for tenure. But I think that's a problem. So just be aware that there's an ongoing discussion about how to evaluate scholarship, and at least try to get a sense of what your editor believes and what they think is right when it comes to that debate or that argument, and see if it aligns with your views or your publisher's views on that, because it's very important in academia. The only thing I would add to that is I think the ORC ID, Scopus ID, Researcher ID, different like metrics that are like programming driven. They're programmed into that online realm where all of our articles show up, and the ORC ID, which I'm assuming you're all familiar with, which authors can get. I'm a big believer in that because it leads to new ways to measure impact. And an alternative to the journalist schema is like what a colleague of mine at the University of Dayton, in Dayton, Ohio, they do this there, and I think a couple of other places do it too. They have an article level schema where they look at an article, and they look at I don't know, it's how many times it's been cited divided by the number of years it's been out, and editorial board composition, like alternative ways to measure the impact of an article or the quality of an article rather than the quality of the journal. I think ORC-ID and Researcher ID and Scopus ID are allowing us to do more of that kind of article level evaluation or individual level evaluation in a way that's fair. So I think that's the way of the future. I know that in our Scholar One, if you register with ORC-ID, you'll get a little green badge and it kind of shows up in there. Whatever we can do to encourage everybody who publishes in the journal or everyone on the board to get on there and get registered, I think is great, because it'll generate a lot of new data that can be used for a lot of useful measures of impact and so forth. Finally, there's cultural differences, and I mean national culture here. So like in some countries, you need to be in certain types of journals, and that can matter in a lot of the conversations that your editors will need to have with people submitting to the journal. There's pay-to-publish models that are fine in some places, but not fine in others, and you just need to be aware of that. I'm sure you all are. There's different cultural based responses to rejection. So we reject probably 88% or so, 90%, we're pushing 90 of the articles we receive. And we can get some nasty letters. They tend not to come from certain regions, and they tend to come from others, I've noticed. And it's just a cultural thing. Like some, I'm a traveler myself, so I know in some places it's hard to criticize someone's idea without them taking it personally. They can and they will and they do take it personally. In other places, it's understood that a bad person can have a great idea and a great person can have a bad idea. And if we reject that idea, it's nothing to do with you. It's just a bad article. Sorry, it's a bad idea. They're like, okay, fine. That makes its way into the mix here, and because there's so many rejections, I think at least talking with an editor and the AE and the editorial team about how they're going to deal with that, because we've gotten some really nasty letters. I mean, we got one, it wasn't that long ago, and I just kind of had fun with it. I'm like, oh, that's not very nice. What else are you going to do? But she was criticizing our journal and reminding me that, hey, your journal isn't this, so I don't know, blah, blah, and it's like, and I emailed the team and I said that, this is going to happen, but never go low when they go low. Never respond to that. I think it's important that you just let them vent or whatever, but that'll happen. And I actually think it's culturally based for anthropological reasons that we can talk about if you want. I think that's it. And so I've published too, obviously, and my turnaround time it matters to some authors, it doesn't matter to others. Emerald tends to have strict metrics on how fast we get an article back to the submitters, and I'm trying to relax that and extend it a little bit, because some authors care about that, but a lot don't, and the reality is we're strained in terms of our capacity, so we can't make 60 days on average. I mean, we're totally breaking that rule for Emerald right now. I mean, we're like bottom of the barrel in terms of turnaround time, but we're getting a ton of papers too, and that's why. But I don't know that the authors care about that as much as we think they do. I think some might, but I don't know. In my experience, I don't buy it. I don't think it's as important as a lot of people think. What else? I think that's it. Again, I didn't prepare real formal remarks for you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And again, I welcome you to our city, and I hope you have a great time here. And if I can ever be of service to any of you in the future, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks a lot.
Stay right there. Are there any questions for Patrick? Okay, so I have
Restaurant
one.
recommendations?
No.
Or
If you don't mind, Patrick.